Welcome to Genuine Humans, exploring the stories behind the great marketing leaders of our time and hearing how their journeys have influenced the brands they've built. Brought to you by The Social Element, here are our hosts, Tamara Littleton, CEO and founder, and Wendy Christie, Chief People Officer.
Welcome back to the podcast, and I'm here with my lovely co-host, Wendy. Wendy, how's your week going?
Hey, Tamara. Really well. We've just had a very big weekend in our household, and our youngest son got married. So we've gained a daughter-in-law. So that's been a very exciting weekend.
That's wonderful.
How are things with you?
Well, it's been actually a really interesting reminder about the power of social media. So we're at the end of July and there have been some flash floods. So London has been affected and I live in East London. And although my road wasn't actually affected, lots of my neighbours have been. And it was actually really incredible and quite humbling because there's been so much negativity on social media and we've seen like the worst of people using social media with all of the racist abuse during the Euros and football, that it was actually quite heartwarming to see just people pulling together and, using social media to say, I've got sandbags if you need them, I've got a pump, I've got spare bedding, and everyone just sort of jumping in and helping each other. So that was kind of, a sort of a bit of a rubbish time for people, but really good to see the community in action on social.
Yeah, that's lovely. It was like that at the start of the pandemic as well, wasn't it? I think we saw the best of humanity then.
And talking of the best of humanity, I'm actually so pleased to say that we're joined here by Nam Nguyen. And Nam is the founder of Supervillain. So welcome to the podcast, Nam.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks so much for having me. I know it's the end of your day and the beginning of mine, so I'm glad we can make it work.
Because you are in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I know you've had such an impressive career in the advertising industry there. I'm looking forward to hearing about your journey. Before we launch into your journey, can you just let us know about the ethos behind the creative agency that you founded? I think was it in 2019, and why Supervillain?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's amazing because it's a name that me and a couple colleagues, we almost started an agency back in 2014. And it was a name that kind of stuck for all of us for different reasons. And we kind of knew then that people would gravitate to it for a variety of reasons. And for me specifically, it's just something I've always identified with. It's this ethos of being a supervillain in a world where you always felt like the other, right? And where other heroes were celebrated. The people that were put in front of you were the ones that you expected, right? Like, very traditionally, like white men, right? Like if I had to be so forthright. And, growing up, I was heavily bullied, even in the business. I never felt like I truly 100% felt in. And even for me, bringing a certain perspective to the business, it always felt counter grain. And I've always kind of been that individual. So when it came time to start my own thing, we knew that we wanted to, one, do things differently, work differently, hire differently, and behave differently. And so when you do things differently, more traditionally than not, you're known as a villain, more or less. So
I love that.
So yeah, that was the kind of the ethos of the agency, and yeah, just to continue on that thought, some of the heroes that I grew up with too were often seen with mugshots or villainized for protesting or sitting in the back of a bus for marching for civil rights, for even today bending on a knee, right? And so when we started the agency, we definitely wanted to make sure that we were in line with the values that we believed in.
That's a great story. How did you get to starting your agency? Can you kind of go a little bit further back and just sort of say, how did you fall into this right from the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love that question because I feel like I've always been pretty entrepreneurial, when I was, I think it goes back to, when, you're a kid and you feel like the world doesn't fit you, right? Like, or you don't fit into the world necessarily. So you kind of have to create your own environments, create your own rules and your own existence and your own worlds, more or less. And so I've always built things, be it in my imagination or in real life, and yeah, it was very natural, when I stepped into the agency world to have built my own disciplines when I was at Goodby Silverstein and Partners, going to an agency in New York, 360i, where they were just starting their creative practice, and helped them build a content studio when social was just blossoming, and having took my practices to there, and have built an agency built a company and a content studio, and helped them build a company that was doing content differently, creative differently, quicker, cheaper. Doesn't mean it's worse, right? Like, the quality was still there, but we were tinkering, and fell into something that I think was really exciting. And then from there, just helping build other people's agencies, that I was very, very fond of being a part of. Built, went inside to build brands, and I've always been a builder, right? And I think the thing is when I was interviewing after my job at Intel, where I was global ECD, and I was interviewing all over the place. Every job you could think of or want, I was interviewing for. But afterwards, after a long, long tour of interviewing around the world, I just realized if I wanted to build something that was most meaningful, it's going to have to be mine, because I had a very specific vision of what I wanted to do.
I was just going to say it's definitely a case of if you can't see what you want to be out there, you have to just go out and build it, right?
Totally. Absolutely. It's, we always say we want to build the world that we want to see next, right? We want to build the world that we want next. And there's so many people that are doing it, right? And I think doing it from the lens of social justice, equity, government, I mean, all across the board. And I was in the nonprofit world a long time ago, and I made a promise to one of my mentors then, that when I moved into advertising, that I would try to take some of the ethos of community building, community organizing, and very purpose-driven values into the marketing advertising space. And so that was a part of it. I feel like I'm just playing a small part in trying to bring a certain way of operating into our business. But in the grand scheme of things, I hope it's just like one of those things that all kind of click in together in the grand scheme of the world. Because even though in our business we like to think we are the world, I very much disagree. But at least I'm hopefully doing my part. Me and my team are doing our part to contribute to the greater good.
And of course, for all of us, our journeys start even further back. And I'm really interested in what you were saying about the world not fitting, and your love of building things. And I'm curious if they were themes from your childhood as well. So I'd love to know, what were you like as a child?
As a child, it's funny, because when I ask a lot of folks, it's I feel like it's really strange. I feel like at the purest moments of my childhood, before a lot of the bullying and the racism kind of surfaced, and I dealt with that for years. I feel like I'm now the person that I was as a child, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I've worked my whole life to do the Picasso thing of not lose sight of your childhood, right? And it was a long journey to get there. But very early on as a kid, I think I was very imaginative. I loved playing with Lincoln logs. That probably dates me, a bit. And if I say Legos, it's maybe a little bit more age agnostic. But I loved building things. I love constructing worlds. The only sibling I had was 8 years older. My sister, and so I pretty much grew up as an only child. So you kind of had to form that. And then I grew up really isolated. Because once I entered into school, I was really bullied for my weight and my ethnicity. And even though Silicon Valley, Bay Area is very much a third Asian, right? At that time, growing up, I think there was this influx of immigrants and Asians, and we were seen as passive. And I, when the bullies came around, I was the only one that vocalized my distaste in their behavior, and fought back. And so I grew up, pretty rough. I grew up, with the extreme violence in the playground and in the neighborhood, which even further made me go into my isolation and my imagination, right? But I also think that set course early on too, that I knew that the world needed to be different.
Right. So it makes me really sad and quite angry to hear those stories about people experiencing that. And, as a white woman in Britain, I don't have that experience. And do you find that does this still happen today?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and what's interesting is it does to a lot of degrees. I think even me starting Supervillain was, now we're getting super personal. Should we just be totally personal and transparent here?
If you're
Yeah,
happy
maybe.
to, we would
Yeah, happy
love
to.
that. Hmm.
It's part of it, and I was so humbled that you had asked me to come on and talk about the story, because I think that's a big part of it. And listening to your previous guests, it's like I love how vulnerable people make themselves here, but yeah, it definitely has informed what I started today, and I still experience it tremendously here in San Francisco. It's fairly homogenous. There are a lot of Asian people, I'm sure, in the city, but I think it's easy to say, hey, you're Asian, you're a model minority, everything's okay, right? Where, for me, being an Asian, my ex-wife is actually a white woman, and we moved into, Pacific Heights, this neighborhood in San Francisco, and I experienced it daily, walking down Fillmore Street, going into a store, and I'm not going to name the store, but the store asking me to leave my bag at the door when women would come in with giant shopping bags, and I'm a grown man, I'm
Yeah.
nearly 40 years old at this point. I'm very well put together. I'm very, I think I'm well spoken.
Hmm.
I think I present kindly. I'm very aware of my color and my size and my presence. So I've always tried to make people feel safe. And it's still one of those things where, if I'm asking if people are asking me to check my bag at the door when everyone else can walk freely, it's really, it's really hard to say and argue with what's going on in the world right now, and to say that people are overreacting to, the social justice issues and the diversity and inclusion efforts that need to take place. And this is me, I think, and then not only that, in that same neighborhood, when I was doing laundry, this woman came down into the garage of my building, threw a bunch of cardboard boxes at me, and asked me to break them down because she thought I was the
You
building
must be the
manager.
help. Hmm.
That must be the help. Yeah. So this happens every day, and it happens, and it's not just a white minority thing either, right? I think all of us, of every ethnicity, every background, need to really examine, how we engage with one another for a more inclusive future. Because even in the height of issues here, we have a very diverse team, but when I walk the streets, I guess I dress how you would imagine, maybe a little bit more on the streetwear slants, right? Like I have a little bit more of that streetwear feel. Wear fitted hats a lot. That's been a signature of mine. I grew up in the age of sneakers, so I'm always wearing, sneakers, and even here in Oakland where I live, I have other people of color coming up to me asking me what it's like to be on the right side of color, right? And so, it's a weird, complicated time, but yeah, I still experience it from all aspects today, of which I think we all do. I think it's not just a race thing, but it's a gender thing, a class thing. It's everyone, right?
Hmm.
So I try not to dwell in it too much, but I think that's why we started an agency that's very inclusive, very multicultural, of which I'm very proud of, because I think we need more of that.
And it's important to talk about it because that's how change happens. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you, Nam. And coming back to when you were growing up, what did you want to be?
Oh, what did I wanted to be a superhero first and foremost, which is funny. Yeah, which is funny. But yeah, no. From when I was a kid, I always wanted to be Batman, right, like that. And so I have this like odd obsession with Batman. It's very embarrassing and kind of nerdy. But from a professional standpoint, I always wanted to be an architect when I was growing up. I was fascinated with building homes and spaces where people can inhabit and live, and I think it went back to my desire to feel safe, or the only place I felt safe, which was under my roof, and so I always wanted to create that, and so I think it also very much ties in with me liking to build things, but being an architect was my dream. When I figured out you need to be really good at math to be an architect, that's when it all went out the window. Yeah.
Do you know, I had the same thing with the being wanted to be an astronaut. When
Oh,
I realised I would have to do maths and physics, I was like, okay, maybe I don't want to go into
totally.
space.
I think,
Yeah.
funny enough, I wanted to be an architect and at one point a vet. But the thing that put me off it was the fact that you had to study for about 9 years for both of them. And I was like, nah, that's not for me.
I'm in the same camp. I'm glad I'm not alone in the whole, like, I thought it was there was due to a lack of ambition, but clearly I'm sitting across from two very ambitious individuals, so I feel less bad about
Yeah,
that.
it's entrepreneurial spirit. You need to just hurry up and
Yeah,
get on with things. That's all.
exactly. Yeah, it's gonna
Exactly.
take 9 years to get to the thing. Yeah.
Are there any jobs that you've had that you'd think, God, that was awful. That was my worst job? I mean, you
Oh
don't need to
gosh.
name names, but if you've got any stories, we'd love to hear them.
Oh yeah, so many jobs. I mean, because I started working real early. I started working real early to kind of gain the independence. But what's funny is like I actually really loved all of my jobs. It's I believe it or not, and I try to impart this on all the teams I've ever led, which is learn how to love everything, and that there should be a pride in one's work. And I think I got that from my parents, who were immigrants. Who had because when I think about horrible jobs, nothing compares to the jobs that they had when they first
Mhm.
immigrated to the States. So I think I always grew up feeling like when I was comparing to things that my parents had to do, I was like, this is amazing. Like I loved being a server at the Cheesecake Factory, which was to a lot of people a horrendous job, but I loved it. I think the only thing I hated was you had to wear all white, and so you'd end up looking filthy at the end of the shift. As you were waiting tables. But even working at the Gap, I worked at the Gap for a couple years, and I loved it. I loved interacting with consumers. I loved folding jeans perfectly. I loved making people feel good as they tried on their clothing, regardless of their body types. Like
Mhm.
I just loved contributing, right? And so it's one of those things I've always taken with me. So I've never really had a job I've hated, because I always feel like there's always something to learn, there's always something to take away, and it's always a step towards something else. But yeah, so it's yeah, I know it's a tough question. I've actually thought about that lately too, because I have a lot of young folks who work here who you hear grumble a bit, and you're like, hey,
Mhm.
like things aren't so bad. That it's gonna pass.
Yeah.
I do think that working with the public, whether that's in retail or hospitality, I think it's such a great grounding for eventually running your company, because you've been, you taught from a young age of how to make the customer or possibly client happy. I just think it's such a great grounding.
Oh, it's huge. It's like one of those things that you always hear. It's like, hey, go work in service, right? Like,
Mhm.
and actually, it's funny. I don't know what it's been like for the both of you, like hiring individuals, but I actually look for that in
Mhm.
resumes. I love it, especially with younger folks. Because the older you get, you kind of leave that stuff off. But I love it with some of the younger talent who come in and very proudly put that they worked in service. Or during an interview, that's a question I ask if I don't see it. Because to that point, it's. I think it's just so meaningful when people can walk away with an experience, having learned how to deal with people, and come out on the other side, more patient, more understanding, more empathetic.
Absolutely.
I think you learned some great lessons there. I couldn't agree more.
The last time we talked, you mentioned that you'd felt burnt out living in New York, hence your move to the West Coast. So, reflecting on that, is there any advice that you give to people living in New York, London, Hong Kong, any of those really fast paced cities?
Yeah, absolutely. I know I got burned out working there, and I miss it every day. Is that strange? Like
No, I feel the same about London.
it's right. It's this very interesting love hate relationship. But yeah, I think it was I got burned out because I didn't listen to myself more, right? And I think that there was a lot of pressure, and there is a lot of pressure, I think, in living in the cities, and especially working on our business that are incredibly social, to keep up with those paces, right? Like you work really hard, you get into the office. I would get in every day at 9, to get a jump start, work till about 7 or 8, go out for dinner and drinks, be home by like 2:30, 3, do it
Wow.
all over again,
Mm.
because I felt like I had to, right? Like there's this aspect of feeling like you had to keep up with everyone, and I feel like that was something that I would have done differently, was just listen to myself a little bit more. I'm actually not an extroverted person by any means. I'm very much an introvert. I've actually get very uncomfortable in crowds. Yeah, but I felt like I had to play the part, be seen, network, meet people, and what I would have done instead is just treat it as a marathon if I wanted some sustainability in those cities, right? Which is like, hey, like, be okay with being listening to myself and what I needed. But I think that was the hardest part.
Absolutely, and it adds a whole new layer of exhaustion. It's not just the physicality of being at work all day and then out until, frankly, the middle of the night, but it's just exhausting if it's something that doesn't come naturally to you as well. If it's not who you are, it's that must have been very difficult. And do you think, in the light of the pandemic and the fact that we're seeing much more in the way of hybrid working and remote working, do you see a time when people just move out of those cities because they can work
Yeah,
from anywhere?
I this is what a great question, right? And I'm sure we all have talked about it, at length with so many of us. I actually don't think the hubs will ever lose. I mean, I think there will probably be a time we saw it in Exodus, but I feel like the hubs are hubs for a reason. I think
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I very much believe that people still need to be, connected and engaged and in spaces with energy. I like the idea of more flexibility, right?
Yeah.
Like I like the idea of like, hey, maybe you split it up, you break it up, and I think that will change things from everything from how you live to how you work to and the locality of that, right? Like I think I think that's all going to be here and here to stay. But I don't really see the hubs, these major cities losing that much because I just think at the end of the day, it is a place with just such great culture, and it brings so many people together. I think if you're looking for a place to belong and it's diverse and a lot of different ideas and museums, music, the theater, the food, and the melding of all of that, I think it really does all meet in a central place. And I think that's just proven throughout history, right? Like you had bazaars and markets, but I do think that we need a bit more of breaks, right? I mean, to the point of which we were talking about earlier, it's like how do you just balance some of that stuff out?
Yeah,
You
it would
know?
be a shame to lose all that vibrancy,
Oh,
but there
absolutely,
needs to be that balance. So,
absolutely.
sort of changing the subject a little now, and thinking back to some of the people that you've worked with over the years, which genuine humans have most influenced your career?
Oh gosh, there's so many. There's so many, and there's so many that I haven't. You lose touch of, and I love this question because I think it's one thing that I think about all the time. But actually, there's so many. It's hard. It's hard. There's so many because I think I like to give. If I could give away all the credit of everything I've ever done, I absolutely would, and I can. Right, I can link back
Hmm.
everything I've ever done and tie it to somebody. Right, but the first person that comes to mind is Gary Allen. I would say Gary Allen, Dave Henderson, Dave Thornton, and Kemi Flynn, Pam Von Wiegand. There was this cluster of folks that took me under their wing when I was a teenager, and I was trying to figure out my way. I was very concerned and about the community and wanted to get involved because of my own experience. And I was volunteering at a domestic violence agency for years, and this group of folks, came to me and asked me if I wanted to, basically co-found this nonprofit called Project Cornerstone. And as a teenager who was trying to find their place, that was incredible. For them to give me a sense of purpose, to let them know that my home was my home, for them to also invite me on as not just a founding member of this organization, but also to sit on their respective companies' boards. So I was sitting in boardrooms with 50-year-olds, which at the time felt ancient, but now I'm like, yes, but but as a teenager to have those experiences of sitting around the table with mostly older white folks and growing up othered for so long, and all of a sudden
Mm.
being in a room and feeling heard and valued and seen, I think really gave me a ton of confidence to go back out into the world and keep moving. So those are just a handful of folks that I can pinpoint early. And then in terms of the business itself, there's so many. I wish there were more in our business. I think going in through the advertising ranks, it got a little lonely at times, but thankfully, I was always really surrounded by really great peers and was really fantastic agencies. Where I've always bet on the people rather than the agency or the agency name.
Hmm.
I've always wanted to make sure that it felt safe, it felt good, And so, I can attribute, every agency I've ever been at to a lot of great folks there. And then obviously, we have our bad seeds. We
Yeah.
got a
Yeah.
few of those too, right? But yeah, those are some names that really stick out, at least early on in my days. And in the business, gosh, so many folks. But yeah, I mean, you'd have to get really specific because I could name like a thousand people. Yeah.
And talking about the agency, because you've been brand side, you've been agency side, and now of course you're running your own show. Would you say that it's made you more of an empathetic leader, having seen it from all sides?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think that's the true definition of empathy, right? Is like to go search and try to see things from all sides. And that was very deliberate in my career, going from nonprofit, especially going into the agency world. I was at Goodby Silverstein and Partners, which was very full service integrated at the time, big on interactive and television. I went to 360i because I really wanted that social digital SEO kind of experience, media from both organizations. And then after that, I went into more of like a cultural music startup agency, because I wanted to see it from like the culture side, the music entertainment side. And then from there, when I went back to San Francisco, I went into PR. I went to Edelman, right? Because I wanted the PR vantage point because I think PR is very powerful and we need to understand that. And then from there, I went to AKQA because I wanted the innovation side. And then that brought me to Intel because I wanted the brand, experience of what it was like to hopefully revitalize a 50-year-old tech company amongst, all these modern giants. But yeah, absolutely. I think I crave seeing things from all angles, not only in business, but that's just like insane curiosity. I think has always been something that I've had about people, about place, and yeah, but especially about our business. I want to understand everything because I think it's super helpful in getting that empathy. Yeah.
And that's such an incredible sort of list of places that you've been to. And what really kind of has jumped out at me is that often when you've gone to places, you have started something new. So I think you mentioned about, really sort of starting off the content division, 360i, and where would you say? So I mean, it strikes me that you're very pioneering. Where does that entrepreneurial drive come from?
Yeah, the entrepreneurial drive I think comes from being very comfortable with being the other and realizing that, hey, if the world's not built for you and what you see, and you see opportunity and you see impact and you see potential there, is like, hey, you got to go build it, right? Like otherwise, for me, it just would have felt like I would have been on a set of rails that would have been architected by someone else, right? And that would have been totally okay if I didn't actually see tremendous opportunity. But the funny thing is the world changes every day. With every rotation, there's something different happening. And I've always believed that, hey, I might have been early in some of the things as well, and I might have been right on time, but I always knew that there were others that saw the world the same way I did, right? Which made me believe that if I built something that it would be meaningful if it filled the space and people really gravitated to it. Yeah, I mean it's hard to explain because I think it's just something that I feel very comfortable in doing, and I'm okay with being wrong.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing, right? I'm okay with coming out and saying like, hey, this is the pathway we need to go. And so many times, it wasn't easy building these things because people would say social does not make sense, like I mean, especially when I was at Goodby early on, and I get it, they were just like, hey, like you're trying to present creative work and a production plan and pieces of content that are a fraction of our budgets.
Yeah.
What is that going to look like when we say we can make all these really great things when we're charging them X for these bigger campaigns? My conversation was just like, well, we can do it here, and it's not for the mass media placements that we have. They're actually, I think, more personalized, but to their credit, right? Like there wasn't really a place to put it yet, right? Like there were forums, there were blogs, but Facebook had just opened up to brands, to select brands, right? So it was still kind of early. but those were always really fun conversations, scary conversations, right? Because when you're going up to like Jeff and Rich and Derek Robson, the managing director, and you're like, hey, I got this wild idea. And they're like, we love it. But, you're like, oh my gosh, did I just totally put my foot in my mouth? But yeah, but it's, I think here's the best part about how I grew up, even though it was challenging. I think growing up, when you're told you're wrong all the time, and when you told you don't belong all the time, at a certain point, if you can make it through that, and if you can see the other side, you're okay with being wrong, right? Like I've lived the rest of my life being okay with being wrong, okay with being the other, okay with challenging status quo, okay with my viewpoint, because as long as I made it out on the other side, like, and I could be comfortable and building the world that I want to see, right? Somebody has to like it, right? And I think it also comes from my ethos of coming from the nonprofit world, where we always used to say in the nonprofit world, hey, if we could just change one life, if we could just change one life, that matters, right? The work we've done matters. And so, when you come into the marketing advertising space, and I'm like, hey, if I could just reach one person in the way that I want to and set them on a course, that matters, right? And so, it's really pushed me to just be a little bit more forthright with some of my thoughts and ideas.
I really get that, and I think it's that sense of when you have been sort of wronged or there's trauma or sort of bad things, it does make you want to save the world or save an individual, and it's so fascinating how many entrepreneurs actually do talk about that as well. That link of, as you say, either being othered or trauma. It's that it brings like a fire in your belly that it's difficult to explain, but I definitely hear that.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm great now, and it's hard then, but you almost have to. I almost feel like sometimes I need to thank those bullies. Like I almost need to thank them for helping me see the world a little differently, because it did unleash something in me that I can't even describe sometimes, right? And I need to be even very, and managing, a lot of young people or younger folks, or managing teams now, or when younger talent reach out to me, I also need to be aware that like not everyone is built the same.
Yeah.
So I need to cool the tempo on what I encourage folks to do, you know. But that also probably explains my New York burnout, right? Like I just go in on everything, and as I get older, I'm learning to listen to myself a little bit more, which is good.
Absolutely. Now, just having a slightly more sort of industry lens, what brands would you say are doing a good job at purpose-led advertising or marketing, in your opinion?
I think there are ones that we've forgotten that I think are still really great, right? Like I love, I still think Tom and Warby Parker, right,
Yes.
are still doing great purpose-led marketing and advertising, or just business, right? Like forget, I think it's so good when we've forgotten that they are about this one-for-one cause-based, purpose-led business model, and it's in their messaging. I love it when we've all forgotten, because they've become household names
Yeah.
and amazing brands, period. Right. And so I think they're really great examples of that. And then there are the very obvious ones, I think, like at least over here, that I think we hear about all the time, so I could tip my hat at the Patagonias and the Ben and
Yes.
Jerry's of the worlds, of course. But I really love it when these small upstart brands, because I think that we're talking about entrepreneurship, right? Like I love it when I see brands come out and they're tiny or they're big, and do really great things. One of my favorite purpose-led brands actually is, have you both heard of State Bags at all over here?
Don't think they've
I
made it
haven't.
over now.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they made it over, but again, it's a one-for-one model, but it's all about kids in school, and you buy a backpack, they fill a backpack full of school supplies, and they give it to a kid. So
That's
I
brilliant.
think I mean, there's so many, right, that have this like reciprocal kind of like model, and just one that I have to plug, because they are a client, and I love them and him and the potential of what they're trying to do and what they are setting out to do, of which I think, we'll see more work soon along that side of things. But, Stephen Curry, in the beginning of Curry brand, he very much, when he launched his namesake brand, very much wanted it to be an impact brand. And we looked at, the Toms of the world as models of, Stephen starting a very large business company with Under Armour in setting very clearly a purpose-led agenda. And so you'll see that come out over the course of the brand. But I'm also very excited that larger individuals and brands are starting to make more commitments there as well, which is so amazing because they were all really kickstarted by these tiny brands. Tom's was a tiny brand, Warby Parker was a startup, tiny brand that changed everything. And I love that how their efforts early on have now permeated, the brand space. And then much credit to the consumers too, right,
Yeah.
for buying into these products. So yeah, those are a few of few.
And it's great as an agency owner when you start working with those kind of clients that you really just love so much. It permeates through the whole agency, and everyone just gets so excited about working with them as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it's so true. I think it's it's funny, and I think it's also one thing that we've undervalued in terms of talent, and I think we over-indexed on is I was always really frustrated, especially running your own agency, right? Is when you actually operate a certain way and you have brands and clients that are very meaningful and the culture is great, the vision is purposeful, attrition happens less,
Yeah.
people are happier, and they're willing to work for less, right? And I think it's like this thing where why aren't more agencies really pushing and partnering with their clients and their brands to do better, be better, because it benefits all of us, right? It benefits us on the agency side, it benefits them on the brand side, and then hopefully the talent jumping that happens so much in our business would reduce, and we wouldn't have to, I don't know. That was just something I was thinking about as we were talking.
And just thinking about the wider industry, this is a big question, but what changes do you think we still need to make in the industry?
I still think, I think the biggest thing, the changes that we have to make first and foremost, I think are how we treat women in our business. I think, I'll take race, diversity and inclusion, but that's including women. But I think how we treat women in our business has always been something that's really bothered me.
Right.
I grew up, coming up as a teenager, I worked in domestic violence agencies for 8 years, right? Doing community education training. And I knew it was pretty, I think it's tough for women everywhere, generally, but in our business, not us, right? Because I don't think we were part of that period, but this whole idea of sex sells and objectification, like we've done so much cultural damage laying out track as an industry that we need to unwire so much, right? And we need to do so much to make sure that we are now making work and building an industry that is changing the conversation for all people, right? And especially women. And then also in the workplace, right? Like I think I've seen, and this is also why the Supervillain name exists, right? Like I've seen so many women across so many agencies be assaulted. You've heard of it. It has happened, and then you've seen them poorly treated, right? I recently read that article or that piece that I forget her
Is it
name
Zoe
already, but it was,
Skaman?
yes,
Yes, Mad Men, Furious Women. Yeah.
yes, recently read that, and I thought I was aware, and I'm pretty in tune, right? Like I've always run and led very balanced teams. I'm a big advocate, and that made my stomach
Yeah.
turn in a way that was so infuriating because I even thought I was aware. So there's I have so much respect for her for writing that piece, and as a agency owner herself, right? Like putting her own name and business on the line to do
Yeah.
so. And Tamara, you were talking about the toxicity of social,
Yeah.
and just to see how much she's gotten for putting that piece out. But talk about a supervillain like Zoe. Like you are a supervillain to the greatest degree, right? Because I think anytime I've tried to say anything in the business in support of that early on, before I became a leader, I was always ostracized, right? I was no longer a part of the club. Like, and then you'd have to go build your own thing. That's why I always built my own thing, because I didn't want to have to play by the rules, even if I was on the inside. And I'm a firm believer of cannibalizing culture, right? Go in, change the culture, leave it for the better, right? Eat the head, right? Is essentially the idea. But yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things. That I think we have to change. And the other is the diversity and inclusion aspect, right? Of from a race and class standpoint, right? And I think both of those are important, right? Because it's not just about, it is about people of color, but it's also about full inclusivity, right? Access to I mean, I didn't go to portfolio school, and thank goodness I was still able to make it through this business, right? But I think you have to have a certain level of access to these days to go through and go to portfolio school if you want to end up at a top agency. Where coming up the other way, is very much harder, and then from that standpoint, the diversity side of things, I just think we need more representation all around from gender and ethnicity.
Yeah, and definitely a move from people committing to doing things and then nothing really changing. And something that has really occurred to me, I mean, you talk about Zoe Skaman, it was such a powerful essay, and the fact that she is able to speak up. She runs her own agency. I feel like there is more power that the independent agencies have to be either fantastic allies or loudspeakers as well. And I really would like to see more change and more agency leaders sort of actually saying this is just not good enough. So yeah, I fully agree.
Yeah, and you say the key word right there, which is change, right? And I couldn't agree more, because I think it's easy to say it all, right? And I think that's the worst part about our business, right? Is like we are masters of saying things.
Yeah.
Like we are masters of saying the right things, of saying what's right on culture, right on trend. And if we all do say, every agency also says, big or small, right, that they want to change culture, actually change culture.
Yeah.
And it starts from the inside. So I love that word, Tamara. Like the change aspect is vital, because the lip service is not enough.
So now we're going to move on to the part of the podcast where we get a bit more personal, as if we haven't already. How do you like to spend your downtime? And do you have any guilty pleasures that you'd be prepared to share with us?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In my downtime, I have the sweetest dog in the world, and I spend all of my time with her. It's her name's Venom. Most people think it's because of a supervillain name. It happens to fit very well, but it's because when I rescued her, she was poisoned.
Oh.
They found her poisoned, and so we wanted to, I wanted to name her something that would reclaim that. And plus, it's derivative of Venus, by the way, if people don't know. So,
I didn't know that.
yeah, it's derivative of Venus, and venom used to be a word, old French word for magical charm. It was almost like a love potion, right? You were under someone's venom, under someone's spell, and then we've taken that and co-opted it to something pretty evil, like we normally do, right? This is why we can't have nice things.
I need your help naming any future pets. That is just awesome.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. So I spend all of my time with her. We like to explore the Bay Area. There's so much around here, in terms of landscape, geography, and she brings me peace. So that's what I do. And then in terms of guilty pleasures, is that what it was,
Yeah.
or vice? Oh gosh, guilty pleasures. I'm an avid gamer. I haven't been able to game that much, but I grew up on gaming. We worked on a lot of gaming at Intel, which was a dream come true. A lot of people don't, I think, really know that about me, because I don't have much time to speak about it anymore. But sometimes I still like to go back and turn on the console and just lose some hours just gaming. I'm kind of a nerd in that way, but yeah.
And we've talked about how much we love the name of your agency. So either superhero or supervillain, what powers would you like to have?
Gosh, it's always so tricky. My instincts say I would like invisibility, and that's not because I want to do anything nefarious, with it. It's really because I like disappearing. Like I don't like attention. I've actually have always stayed away from press and PR. The only reason why I came on here is because of your guys, of your both of your reputations, right? And literally of the intent. And obviously Chloe is a dear friend, and I trust her to no end. But yeah, it would be invisibility. Sometimes I would just like to get out of a crowd or a sticky situation, and I also think it goes back to being the other. Sometimes you get unwanted attention, and you're just like, hey, can I just exit this, situation peacefully? And so I would say a little bit of invisibility would be my power.
I'm kind of also thinking that in my head, I can't get this out, but the Homer Simpson cartoon when he just kind of backs into a
Yes.
hedge.
Totally. That is what I want to do so often, and throughout each day. It's amazing, but that's perfect. That's a perfect reference. If this was a text chat, that would be the gift that you'd send me. Yeah.
And given the choice of any brand that you haven't worked with yet, who would you like to work with?
Oh gosh, so many. There are a lot of great brands out there. I'm still I grew up wanting to be a filmmaker, so I would still love the opportunity to work in the film space. One brand I would love to work with, and because we do so much also product work and consulting work, I would love to work with DC, Warner Brothers DC,
Yeah.
where Marvel is kind of eating their lunch right now, right?
Yeah.
With the cinematic universe, where DC, I'm a big Batman guy, like I told you. So I would love to help create that universe, right? I think because when I think of Marvel, going back to the work aspect of it, they've done such a great job of creating a fully integrated transmedia experience, right? We can finally use the word transmedia in a way that we couldn't 15 years ago, right? Because now we can do that. But they've created such an experience that I think as a brand we covet, right? It's online, it's offline, it's experiential, it's productized, it's content, it's comic books. They've done a fantastic job. So as a Batman fan, I would love to help out the Dark Knight and his other Justice League friends, and see if we could do that. And then and I'm a very inclusive person. And then what at one point those two universes collide, right?
Why
That would be
not?
an absolute dream. Yeah. So.
And if Tamara and I had it within our power to give you an extra hour every day, what would you do with it?
That's easy. It would be read. I would read. I think it's something that I think all of us need to be doing more, quite frankly. Is turn off the phone and just read. I think the power of the written word it's probably more potent than anything, right? And I would just love more time to do that and dive into, new authors, old authors, but just take some time to not take my ability to read and come and think about these things for granted, and I
Yeah.
feel that's something that we all are doing less of in general. I would assume, but for me, I always feel really guilty because I do know that being able to read is such a gift, and it's not something I do nearly enough.
How would your friends describe you, do you think? And how would you like them to describe you?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. How would my friends describe me? I think they would describe me as pretty level-headed, as kind of almost like a patriarch. I've been known to in all my team meetings throughout my career to just drop some really terrible dad jokes throughout the meeting. I like to think they're so bad they're good, everyone. But yeah, no, I think they would describe me as someone who is pretty consistent, pretty warm, I think pretty generous, I think very committed, very shy at the same time. Those who really know me, I think know that I'm really shy, and I think that's exactly how I would like them to describe me. I just feel like we should be who we want
Who we
people
want
to
to be?
describe. Yeah. So I feel lucky enough to have really great people and friends and a team that allow me to do so all throughout my career. I feel very blessed to be able to do that.
I've loved hearing about your journey and your career. I'd like to just ask, how do you define success?
This may sound totally strange, and because I don't have children, and gosh, I may not ever, depending on circumstance, but I always used to say or think to myself, what are the stories I want my kids to tell about me? And that's the type of success that I would define, right? Is have you led a life that you'd be proud of if your kids told about you? It's really not about the awards. I've always shied away from the awards, and God, I mean, I'm gonna be so forthright and say, like, a lot of people have taken a lot of credit for my work over the years because I haven't really chased the awards or the notoriety and whatnot. But it doesn't really matter to me. All that stuff is temporary in my mind. I think success for me really is defined by how you're remembered and the impact you left in our small corner of the world. And so I've picked marketing, advertising.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. This has been wonderful, and it's been so great to get to know you better as well. Is there anything that you wish that we had asked that we haven't asked, or any closing thoughts from you?
Not really. I'm not really one who likes to talk about myself. So thank you for giving me the opportunity, and it's something that my whole team and so many people, so many dear friends who are wishing for Supervillain success, that are telling me I need to do more of, right? Because as a agency founder, you need to kind of be more public and be out there. But no real closing thoughts outside of the fact that I really, it's been a complete honor, sitting and chatting with the both of you, because what you've built is exactly what I hope to build. I think the reputation precedes the organization and the both of you, and yeah, no, I think we just all need to find each other, lock arms and run really fast. I think, right? It's kind of my thought. So yeah, no, the closing thought is I hope I can continue down a path in doing the type of work and building the type of company I want to build. But if there's any proof that it can happen, it's you.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no doubt whatsoever that you're going to be a supervillain for years to come.
You've been listening to Genuine Humans, brought to you by The Social Element. If you loved what you heard, remember to subscribe, or you can find out more at www.thesocialelement.agency.